And I want to talk to you for a second about fight or flight. I want to talk to you specifically about the biology behind these two. There is a chemical in our brain called cortisol. And cortisol is, amongst many others, a stress chemical. When we get a hit of cortisol, it makes us more amped. It gives us a huge glucose up in our bodies. And it makes us be able to deal with a fight or flight situation. And when you look at fight or flight, this is how it looks like in society. This is how it looks like in history, in military history. But what happens after that cortisol injection, that hit of cortisol? It oftentimes makes us feel like this. It's a taxing hormone on us. It makes us feel tired. It's bad on our bones. It's a chemical that afterwards leaves us exhausted. And it's with cortisol in mind that a few months ago, actually several months ago, a general from the Army got in touch with me and said he read one of my books. And this is the weird thing about writing books. You can be kind of a liberal living in California, and all of a sudden people read your books. And this guy writes me, and I didn't exactly know who he was. Turns out he is the general who was in charge of leadership for the Army. And he's right now in charge of the entire Army. And he says that they're basically facing a huge problem. And the problem that they're facing is that this is the first time in a very long time that for 10 years we've had back-to-back combat. People who have been deployed 3-4 times in the course of a 10-year career. And as they come back, how do you create an army that isn't feeling the effect of cortisol? And cortisol tends to have an effect like post-traumatic stress disorder, like problems adjusting. Like, how do you build a trust-based network in the army? And regardless of your politics for a second, think about the implications that the head of the army right now is thinking about. How do you build a trust-based network? How do you leverage something that the Army isn't known for, something called soft power? And for the last year, I've gotten to actually have a lot of conversations, and I've been meeting a lot of these soldiers and Army officers who've had these combat experiences. People like Keaton, who's a helicopter pilot, served back-to-back tours. People like Elliot served back-to-back tours, 20 years in service. And what we've done, and what I just came back from Kansas, of all places, is we took these guys and we put them here. Put them in a circle. And we got them to talk, amongst other things, about their feelings. And we got them to relate about what it's been like to have these experiences overseas and what it's like to come back. And we got them to relate in what I would argue is a more humane, human level. And what we've noticed is that a very weird thing happens when they get into these circles. There's a sort of intimacy, and that's a word you don't oftentimes hear in business. It's not a word you oftentimes hear in the Army, that develops. And here you'll see at the very edge, there's a chair that's empty. And the reason that chair is empty is because there's a person taking the picture. And the person taking the picture, I brought with me, not a usual suspect in Army circles. This is Kelly. And the thing to know about Kelly is that, amongst other things, she practices soft power. Amongst other things, she's very soft. She likes to nurture human relationships. And if the Army works on cortisol, Kelly functions, I would say, on a different chemical, oxytocin. Oxytocin is released primarily when mothers give birth. And what it does is it actually creates an instant trusting relationship. When people are given oxytocin in lab situations, they trust their partners more. When a newborn is born, its sight of vision is just a few inches. When you think about that, that's exactly the distance from the mother's chest to her eyes. Oxytocin is responsible for those levels of connections. And what I want to talk about a little bit today is about oxytocin and about how you can have a leadership model that isn't based on traditional cortisol, but it's based on oxytocin instead.